G'day, I'm Travers. The most important thing in drawing a straight line freehand without using a ruler is how we use our body. Drawing on a relatively small scale, we can get away with a lot of things not using our body in the best way possible to draw, but not so straight lines. What we shouldn't do is to hold our pen tightly. It might feel that holding my pen very tightly will give me more control over where that line goes. But the reality is, it's not true. Tight fingers will absorb a lot of energy and attention and make it difficult for me to draw a nice long straight line. The other poor drawing habit, which will affect our ability to draw straight lines more than most things, is to draw from our fingers or our wrist, or even our elbow. When we draw from our fingers, we're really keeping our wrist still and just moving our fingers. In fact, if we draw this way, it's possibly because we're resting our wrist and our hand fairly heavily on the paper. And that can work quite well for short lines. But if we want to draw a longer line, what happens is we start to run out of ability to stretch our fingers because they are only so long. And so our lines, the further we take them, the more curved they become, even if we want them to be straight. If we rest our elbow on our paper or on the table, we have the same problem. While it might be nice and straight for a little bit, and certainly further than we can achieve with our fingers and wrist, it will start to curve because we will start to pivot on our elbow and our line will start to pull away from straight. So instead of drawing by moving our fingers, which give us a very limited range, or from moving our wrists, which extends the range of a straight line, but it's still not very great, or even our elbow, which again lets us draw a bit further. But at some point, all of these lines are going to start to curve. We need to use our whole arm, and we control our whole arm from our shoulder. We draw everything really, but particularly straight lines, we draw from our shoulder. We do large movements that we have to use our shoulder muscles to create. And by using these strongest muscles, and these muscles are stronger than the muscles in our fingers or wrist or elbow. And because of that, they actually give us more control, even though they're further away from the action end of our drawing, from our pen and our paper. But the same brain that controls our fingers controls our shoulder muscles and our eyes for that matter, all of which have to be coordinated for every line. So it's not a problem that we're drawing from further away from our paper. Now, if we haven't drawn from our shoulder using our whole arm consciously before, it can seem a bit of a strange concept. And it can be hard to even know if I'm doing it correctly or not. What I would suggest if you're not sure is you actually place your non-drawing hand on your shoulder and draw a few lines. You should be able to feel your shoulder muscles moving as you move your hand. If you're drawing from your fingers or from your wrists, you might feel a few twitches in your muscles in your shoulder, but you're not feeling them move in any substantial way. Whereas drawing from the shoulder, you will feel them extend and contract as you move in whichever direction you draw. Now, if we're going to draw using our whole arm, then we're going to need to make sure that we've got space around us where our whole arm can move without bumping into things. And in this social media age, where it seems that everything we draw we have to record and video, then we can have tripods and lights and cameras in the way. If we can't change where they are, then maybe we need to position where our chair is and where we are so that whatever's happening, we still have space to move our arm from up here. Because if for some reason I can't move my whole arm, I will start to draw from lower down where I do have room to move. But that will not give me as much control over my lines and they will not be as straight. My second tip is to draw the line as fast as we can without it being so fast that it starts to become careless. Because we're drawing from our shoulder muscle, we get good control at a moderate pace. So maintaining a relatively rapid movement is an advantage for a nice long straight line. It doesn't give us time to be uncertain or start wobbling through fear. The other important benefit from moving briskly in our lines is that it doesn't give us time to start to transfer control back to our elbow or our wrist. And if we're moving slowly, we can start to lean too heavily on our drawing surface, and that will interfere with our shoulder's ability to control the movement, and without realizing, we will start to transfer control of that line movement further down our arm towards the pen, losing control and accuracy all the way. So a nice quick movement so we don't have time to lose our nerve. My third tip for a nice straight line is not to look at the end of our pen when we draw. Instead, keep our focus on where we want the line to end. So let's say we're starting our line here and I want it to come over here, then this is where I look. And I draw a nice brisk line. Sometimes I will actually put a small dot to help me focus more accurately on where the line needs to end, particularly if I'm not joining it to anything. Oops. And what I did when I got to that point, I slowed down to check whether I was still going to be accurate and hit my mark. Of course, that distraction caused me to slightly wobble my line and miss my mark. So we'll try that again. And that's a bit better. So keeping our attention on where we want our line to go makes us less self-conscious about exactly what's it doing now. It lets us think about a nice, steady, smooth arm movement from the shoulder to get to that point. And there it is. A very helpful practice, which I use for many lines, not just straight lines, is my fourth point. And that's it can be helpful to draw a straight line by doing a dry run first. And by dry run, I mean holding the pen and tracing where we want the line to go and just see whether we can do that line in a nice smooth movement without bumping anything, to get a sense of where we're starting and where we hope the line will finish, and see whether it does or doesn't finish in the right spot. It lets us get a feel for the muscles in our arm that we need to use. It's like a dress rehearsal for my brain, for my eyes, for my fingers, for my pen, for my arm, for everything that needs to come together to draw a nice straight line. The more important the line is to my overall drawing, the more likely I am to do a dry run. I also find this helpful when I'm doing curves, particularly sides of domes, where we have a curved line which is often visually very dominant in the drawing. And so I want to give myself every chance of getting it as correct as I can. A practice run can be very helpful for warming up all those parts of me that need to work together to draw the line accurately. And sometimes a dry run can also tell me if I'm going to bump into something. And a dry run can also warn me that I'm going to bump something, which is particularly helpful if we're filming. My fifth point on ways of drawing straighter freehand straight lines is to be aware of the paper orientation, because when we draw lines, depending whether they're vertical or horizontal or diagonal, we require different movements of our body and of the pen. For instance, if we're drawing a vertical straight line, we're actually pulling the pen down the page towards us. And so if I'm going to give my arm nice free movement to move the whole arm from the shoulder, I need to make sure that my torso isn't in the way, that my elbow's not going to hit my stomach before I get to the end of where I want the line to be. However, if I'm drawing a horizontal line, I'm not pulling the pen at all. I'm pushing the pen or dragging the pen across the page, which is a very different movement. And I'm starting with my arm probably held against my body here and moving the whole arm away from my body as I go. And at no point am I resting any weight on my hand as it glides across the paper. And if I'm doing a diagonal line, it's a different movement depending whether I'm going upwards or downwards. If I'm going upwards, then I'm pushing. If I come downwards, I'm pulling. For different reasons, we all find certain lines and certain line directions easier to do than others. I have a preference for drawing a line straight down than straight across. And yet, I would rather draw a diagonal line pushing or dragging the pen upwards than pulling it towards me. And as you can see, I'm more accurate going in the direction that I feel more comfortable with. And so knowing what direction I achieve the best results in drawing straight lines means I can turn my paper around. And so I could have drawn this line this way and drawn a more accurate line if I were doing a drawing rather than a teaching video on straight lines. So by being aware of the direction in which we get the best results in our straight lines means we can position our paper for the best lines possible. My sixth tip in drawing straight lines is if for some reason there's a problem. Let's say I'm drawing a line and I realize that I haven't positioned my hand very well, or I'm not sure I'm visualizing the correct end point. Then stop. And when we stop, it's best to stop by continuing to move our arm just a little bit further along, but lifting the pen as we do that. If we stop our hand movement on the paper, more ink will transfer from our nib onto the paper and we'll get a bit of a blob point there. When I reposition my arm, or I sneeze, or whatever has to happen happens, to restart my line, focus on where I want the line to go. But when I start to draw, don't try and put the pen onto the point where we finished, but rather try and start as close to it as possible without touching. What that means is we avoid an overlap, because an overlap will give us something which is a little more obvious, if not just because we've got double the ink in that spot. For my seventh tip, I need a sketchbook. Now, I haven't drawn using a sketchbook for some years now. This tip is particularly helpful when we have a notebook of some type, and it's using our edge to help us get a straight line. So whereas on this side of the page of a sketchbook, it can be easier to do a straight line because this half of the page gives us a good resting point as we move our arm. On this side, our arm is just in space. Depending exactly how we hold our pen, we position our fingers or our knuckles and we bring them down, gliding on the edge. And for this, we keep our fingers locked in position because our movement and accuracy isn't coming from our shoulders in this case. It's coming from sliding our finger or our knuckle or our hand down the edge of the paper. And sometimes we can reach quite some way across the page for doing that. So that can be a helpful tip as well, unless you think it's cheating, and in that case, hey, you can do it a harder way if you want. My eighth and final point is, generally, my advice would be the best way to get better at drawing is simply to draw. Draw the things you love, draw the things that you enjoy looking at, and that will develop the skills that you most need. But I think with straight lines, it's possibly the one element of drawing that might be worth just practicing on its own. Generally, I don't warm up before a drawing, but it's not necessarily a bad practice. But straight lines is something that we can do on its own, and it can get us used to engaging our whole arm from our shoulder to consciously draw straight lines as an exercise. I've resisted the urge to refilm this and to get this line a bit straighter because, hey, it may encourage you more to see that we can all lose our attention for a moment. Clearly, I need to do a little more practice. Well, if drawing straight lines has been something of a problem for you, then I hope these points will be helpful in giving some direction that may improve the accuracy of your freehand straight lines. It really is a great skill to develop for any drawing, but particularly if we enjoy drawing architectural streetscapes. Have fun, and I'll see you next time. Bye.